And another approach is really like, no, this is not about documenting the music. This is about like creating an art form that's about like something completely new that you can do in the album, some things that you cannot do live.
I got connected to today's guest not too long ago, and it has been so fascinating learning about what he's up to in the music world and his journey. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with bassist and composer Ehud Ettun, who is originally from Israel, where he studied with Michael Klinghoffer. Great guy and fascinating educator and former podcast guest. And after studying with Michael, Ehud went to study at the New England Conservatory, and he has developed quite a career as a jazz bassist, as an educator. He lives in rural Israel now and started a music school there. It's just such a cool path. I love what he's doing musically. Really, really interesting. We talk about his latest album and much more. So be sure to follow him. We've got links to his website, and he's on Facebook and YouTube as well. Quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Modacity, Steve Swan String Bass, Colstein Music, A440 Violin Shop, and Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Thank you so much to all of them. And let's dive into this conversation with Ehud Ettun. Where to start? Maybe tell me about growing up. And I did see you studied with Michael Klinghoffer for a period of time, who's a great friend of mine, and I've had him on the podcast. And just tell me about your background, where your early years growing up, and that kind of thing.
Okay, I mean, I guess I studied piano like every good kid who studies piano, and I guess I didn't practice like most kids that don't practice. And then at some point I was like, okay, that's too much, and I quit. And then, like, in 5th grade, I picked up the guitar and I started playing, like, rock and songs, whatever. And then I had a rock band. And then all my friends from the rock band, they were really serious in music. I think I was also really serious in music, but I wasn't, like, an extremely good guitar player, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're like, yeah, man, we are going to audition to the best music school in Israel. So we're not going to come to the rehearsal next week. And I'm like, oh, okay, I think I want to audition too, So then I went to the audition. It was like audition for a classical music school. Like I was standing in line with my electric guitar. Before me was a cellist. After me was a violinist. And I was like, oh. And then somehow, somehow I got accepted into this school based on like my ear or something, whatever. But they were like, yeah, we are willing to take you in if you're going to work really hard on like catching up on theory, but also like, why don't you pick a real normal instrument, not like the electric guitar, This is a classical music school. And I was just getting into jazz, and I was just like starting to play jazz on my guitar, and I was like, actually bass kind of is the instrument that I would like to study. And they put me to study with Michael Klinghoffer.
Uh-huh.
So, like, he was my first, like, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, first lesson bass teacher for, like, 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And really, like, I fell in love in the bass, I think, because of things to him. But also I spent, like, all my high school playing the classical repertoire, Dragonetti, Koussevitzky, Bottesini. All the good stuff.
Well, he's a good foundation. He's always. I've been to a few bass events with him, and he's always so busy because he's running the youth program or that kind of thing. I'm sure you went through the paces with him, and he studied with Gary Carr for a long time, and he has all these like shifting drills and all sorts of stuff. Did you go through all that sort of technical stuff with him with the bow and everything?
Yeah, totally. I think like one of the incredible things about Michael is that he teaches you to be a bass soloist, And that's like something that's like, almost doesn't exist in our world,
Yep.
But lessons with Michael is like, okay, you're going to be like the best bass soloist you can be. Mm-hmm. And I remember like growing up, I would see these like old orchestra players coming and being like, but do you study any orchestra stuff? Do you like spend a lot of time in the orchestra? And I'm like, no, I'm a bass soloist, And like, and like thinking back, this is like the best foundation you can get for many of the things that I do, because it's like really exploring stuff that is so rare to explore for a bass player.
That's super interesting because I listen to what you're doing now, and it's definitely rooted in the world of jazz, or at least what I've heard is. And
Yeah, yeah.
I used to, back when I lived in Chicago, I used to teach bass at DePaul University, one of the schools there, and I did many things there, but one thing I did was I taught the jazz students classical technique, and I always struggled with like what should I do with these people? What should and most of them came in. Some of them had bow chops. Many of them they could barely use the bow, and it was always I always had a hard time figuring out what do I work on Dragonetti with them? Do I what? But that's
Right.
cool. So that you found that valuable just as an overall foundation.
For me, it was like super valuable to the point where, with my students, I don't even teach jazz. I'm like, no, here's what we do. And like just go through the bass repertoire because we are so lucky to have an instrument that has a repertoire of so many years back, and that's like not the case for all the instruments in the jazz world. So like it's a richer tradition of the instruments, and I think like also in the world of jazz you can hear some bass players that kind of like relate to this bass tradition. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's super interesting. Did you think so? So you're being trained by Michael, and you're thinking of yourself as a bass soloist. And I mean, were you always playing jazz as during those years too? Was that always kind of like your passion, or?
So like thing is, at some point I think that I was always into jazz. I was always like really into jazz, but I think really during my high school time I studied like classical bass, and this was the main thing that I did. So jazz was like kind of doing it on the side, right? And then when I went to do my bachelor degree, which I did in Jerusalem at the academy, it was like no question, I'm going to do it in the classical bass department and do a classical bass recital and study classical bass. And then but through this time, I was kind of having this feeling like the classical bass guys, they would look at me and be like, he's the jazz guy, right? And I would always like feel like I wouldn't fit. And then the jazz guys, they would be like, this guy is like the classical bass player, so he can't really swing or whatever. And I remember like it got to the point where somebody came to me and told me like, you are this like multidisciplinary bass player, and I got so insulted, because I just wanted to belong. But anyway, it was like this time that I did this, and I think like throughout my bachelor degree, it was becoming like more and more clear that I actually like had gigs, But I never studied jazz bass in this time, and only like one time I went to Rome, to Italy, and I saw a poster in the street with like a photo of Larry Grenadier, like Larry Grenadier and this like the bass thing. And I was like, oh, Larry Grenadier, what does it say? And then my Italian friend was like, it says he's coming to teach in Rome for a week. And so I like got everything and I went to study with Larry Grenadier in Rome for 1 week in some like seminar in Rome. And this was the first time I studied jazz bass. Before that, like I never did.
Wow. Well, what a good way to start studying jazz bass too. And I mean, talk about a player with a strong classical rootings too. Larry is actually from here in the Bay Area, and he, fabulous player in all aspects. But I saw him 2 years ago do a recital solo and then with his wife, and it was almost completely with the bow, and so it's really interesting. So what was that like, spending a week with Larry? That must have been a blast.
It was such a blast, because by that time I listened to his playing so much, so I was kind of like, the Larry Grenadier bass playing is really hard to point out like what it is, right, and what makes it so amazing. But he was kind of doing that in this week. He was like not really doing it, but he was giving you all this exercise to like play more clear and less clear and like, I don't know. And he showed me a bunch of like exercises that he got from Ron Carter, which is like, different walking bass exercise, like land on the third, land on the fifth, land on the seventh, whatever. But anyway, I think like more interesting for me was just like to see how he's thinking about like accompanying, And I think it's really deep. A week wasn't enough, and it was really deep. And also, he has this he had this vibe, which is like, he never learned jazz in a formal way of learning jazz. So he was like, I think even like when he got a chance to do his degree, he did it in like literature. So I thought like, this is really cool because there is something about the world of like classical music which is so methodic and like there is a structure to everything. And there is something about the world of jazz which is very like free and open and curious, And there is something so cool in learning this thing that way and this thing that way.
For sure. No, that's great. I can't think of a more positive role model or someone to spend time with. I just love. Larry. He just has such a warm and easygoing and this deep way of just relating to people and certainly talking about music and bass. I had him on the podcast maybe 2 years ago, and that was like such a fun conversation. Just to kind of get into the way he thinks about music and sound, and his improving over time and everything. Just totally, wow, what a cool week that must have been. That must have been so inspiring.
It was amazing, really. It was like, I think like, it was just incredible. Really life-changing.
So was that while you were at the Jerusalem Academy? Were you studying there, or was that after? When did that week take place?
Yeah, I guess it was while I was studying, like in one of the summers in between.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So was that kind of the catalyst? You're like, all right, I'm gonna go down this jazz path. Was that sort of? Fuel?
I think it was. I think it was, and also I think it was like I was. By that time, I was playing gigs. Jerusalem jazz scene is really small, so there was like one place to play.
Okay.
I was doing my compulsory army service in the same time that I was doing my bachelor degree, and it's the same time that I was like playing these jazz gigs. So I remember I would come like still with the uniform and like play the gig with the uniform just to like, but it was really small, and I was playing a lot at this time, and it was the time that I kind of learned some of the jazz repertoire and some approaches to jazz, and I was playing also a lot of like free jazz stuff because that's like really big in Jerusalem. And by that time I understood that like not only I think I want to be a kind of more of a jazz bass player, because I think until today I didn't really make the decision that, hey, I want to be a jazz bass player, right? I still want to play in tune and whatever.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so but I kind of realized that if I want to go to study abroad, maybe like going in jazz is wiser, both in terms of like fitting the goals of what I want to do at the time and also like getting scholarships, whatever.
Every day when I sit down to practice, I get up my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion, and I have a specific routine I go through, and here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co, and we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Each time the string winds around the peg, be sure that it lays neatly next to the previous coil as opposed to crossing over itself, which increases the risk of breaking. Wind each string from the middle of the peg outward, making sure never to rub up against the peg box wall, which also increases risk of breakage. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Buying an instrument or bow is a major decision, especially the first time a student's looking for an instrument. Here's A440 Violin Shop's Michael Spadero on what he advises.
We usually start with an approximate price range, and we'll show them anything within that price range, and then to give them a little bit of context, I'll often show them instruments that are more or less expensive than that. But I say to play as many instruments or bows as possible before you buy.
Whether you're looking for a new instrument or a new bow or that next step in your journey, A440 Violin Shop has got you covered. Look for them online at a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I've always been curious about that compulsory Army service. So you can do that while you're in school. You're not just solely doing that. How does that work?
I think I was lucky. You know, I had some kind of army job that was, really close to the music academy. So
nice.
I went and sneak in a few lessons here. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, so when did NEC happen directly after that? So you were at the academy, spent time with Larry, then was Boston your next step?
When I went to NEC, I remember I walked into the building of NEC and I saw this cello player practicing. And then I went to the next room and I saw this saxophone player practicing, I don't know, Parker, whatever they practice. And then the next room, and I saw some oud player practicing some Arabic music. And I'm you know what, this is the place I want to be. If all these three things happening one room next to the other, I'm I think this is the place for me. So then I went to NEC. And Michael Klinghoffer was you should study with Donald Palma if you're at NEC. And so I went and I even though I was a jazz major, I went and studied with Donald Palma. And we even had a chamber ensemble of 4 bass players playing the Gunther Schuller bass quartet. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Don, I mean, what a talk about an open-minded artist and somebody that's explored all kinds of, what a great person to spend some time with.
Yeah, completely, and this was also for me, studying with Don was amazing. Not only because he is such an amazing player and an amazing teacher, but also because he is so different than Michael, He was saying some things that are the opposite of the Michael big, you should do this. And then I was actually here, you can also do it the other way. And it still works and plays it amazing, So I don't know. I think that was really cool for me because I feel I was really lucky that I had one teacher. I see a lot of students that switch teacher every really short times, and I feel so lucky that I had the same teacher for 10 years because this is really, you could follow one method all the way. But then also when I was studying with Don, it really opened my mind to hey, yeah, you're doing it this way, but try this way, and it could work even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what a great town to be in too, Boston. Music scene, and there's so much going on. That must have been a really fun environment to find yourself in.
Yeah, it was super fun, and also that's when I felt if in Jerusalem I felt I was doing classical and jazz and playing free and playing with whatever. In Boston, it's I was, I was coming as a jazz player and I was playing jazz and I was playing jazz all around. Which was amazing. It really defined my identity those years, I think, as a jazz bass player. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, now you look a few years, it's not that many years ago that you were just doing that, and you've recorded with Blue Note, and you've played all over the place, and with all. Didn't I see you play with Danilo Perez?
Yeah.
Okay, who one of my I can't say enough good so many great artists. So people listening probably would love to know so you're at NEC and you're studying with Don, and I'm assuming you're starting to gig out in Boston and the area. So just how did your career develop from that point?
One time I played there's this small place in Boston called the Lily Pad. Mm-hmm. It's a tiny place to play. There is a grand piano, there is drums, there is a bass amp, and you can come and play. And we were playing with some quartet. There was I don't know, 5 people in the audience, 6 people in the audience, And then after the show, I met George Garzon. Because apparently George Garzon came to the show. And George Garzon is this amazing saxophone player who is into free playing and he's really incredible saxophone player. And then George came to me and he's man, we should play. And he invited me to his house, and we played a session in his house, which was, really, really amazing for me. And then I started playing with George Garzon and another drummer, Jorge Perez Albela. And we had this trio. We called it the Pisco Trio because our first tour was in Peru.
Nice.
And we were drinking Pisco. Anyway, so, we had this trio which was basically going on stage playing free for like an hour and done going off stage, And then I feel like I was in Boston. Then I was starting to play more and more in Boston. So then we went to the Panama Jazz Festival, which is Danilo's festival, and that's where I also played with Danilo. And it was like a bunch of things that led to each other. And I was really like, I feel the amazing part of it is that you have to learn so much hard music on every week, Because like if you are busy and you're playing, that's what you have to do. It's like, okay, now I have to prepare this insanely hard music because we have a gig with this guy, and then the next day is like insanely hard music for another concert. And this was really times where I was like, wow, I feel myself getting better, because like if you took me last week and told me I'm going to play this, I would tell you no way. Yeah, I don't know.
Man, you never know where you're playing and there's 6 people in the audience, so you never know where a gig's going to lead you, right?
Right, totally. And that's so true, it's like, yeah, underestimated.
Well, the image of I've been to Peru, only not playing gig. I took a youth orchestra that I used to conduct to Peru, and that was a trip. That was quite a but playing free in Peru, yeah, Lima and maybe Cusco,
yeah.
I can see it in my mind. What a cool experience.
Totally. We're like going there, and I think like also George, he has this thing where he's like, he's really the best, and like wherever he goes, like saxophone players are coming, and like they know George Garzon is in town, they know to come. We were playing this club, and like at some point, I don't remember even what songs we were playing, but like I see like the saxophone players are like all lining up to play, It's like kind of join, and George is like, yeah. And they all came, and he was making sure like every saxophone player that wanted to play like came in and played, and then he was like taking killer solo after. So I don't know. I think like it was really an incredible tour and an incredible experience, this thing in Peru, and also it was the first time that I could feel that like, wow, these people, we were playing like big to like really large audience, maybe like, I don't know, really large, whatever, for free jazz, like 500 people suddenly come to your free jazz show. And it was the first time I'm feeling like, wow, I think this music can speak to people. We were playing something, I was like, I saw people connecting, which was really weird because, in New York or in Boston, you play free jazz show. Yeah, it's great, it's amazing, but really, like you said, like 5-6 people come, and yeah.
Well, it's fascinating to me that there's an audience for that, like in a place like Peru. I mean, how cool is that? I wonder what it is. I mean, I get it, and I've gone to. I don't go see a lot of free jazz, but I certainly have. And I enjoy it. I wonder what it is about that speaks to people, maybe in Peru or anywhere. But it's interesting. What do you think? What do you think it is that? How's that happening? That.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of these thoughts now because of the album.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I feel like, especially as a bass player, like recording music almost seems pointless to me so much of the time, because I feel like really this thing happens in the room that it happened in, and it happens like with the audience that were there in the moment, and with the musicians that were there in the moment, with whatever they had on their mind, and it was like a live music situation where like you had to be there, Yeah. And if you weren't there, like go hear a live show, and like you will see, because especially in jazz where it's like so much improvisation, and even more in free jazz, it's like if you're there in the audience, you're part of it, and you're watching something that's alive,
Yeah.
And then I was so struggling with the idea of like recording, because like this is like taking this super spontaneous alive thing that's like, is there as a like as a one-time thing that's not gonna ever happen again, and you're there in the audience or in the musicians having a chance to take part of this like event, and then like recording it, like to listen back. What are you gonna listen back to? I don't know.
Oh, I hear it. No, I know. It's almost like the opposite of the impulse, because like, I just, that's something I love about live performance, and that you got to be there or you miss the moment, being there. And so like, yeah, putting down to, on record or CD or whatever. Yeah. And like kind of casting it, for eternity it's a very different, it's like a different art form almost.
Yeah, totally different, But then, like, I feel like really there is two approaches. I remember that Larry Grenadier, he was saying, like, sometimes with Brad Mehldau, we felt like we wanted to document the music.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is really an approach, I was like documenting the music. Like, we have something going on, let's go to the studio and document where we are in this point of time, And another approach is really like, no, this is not about documenting the music. This is about like creating an art form that's about like something completely new that you can do in the album, some things that you cannot do live,
Well, I'd love to know how you... This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, and I've always been impressed by how Steve manages to get basses sounding so vibrant, whether it's a student-level bass or a top-of-the-line professional bass. Here's Steve on some of what he has learned in terms of setup.
When steel strings came into general use around 1959, the German bass makers flipped out, and they really got scared that they're going to get big shiploads of basses back that got wrecked by these high-tension steel strings. And so they did three things that really changed the function of the instrument. They shortened the string length, and they lowered the neck angle so the bridges weren't that tall anymore. And then they made the tops a lot thicker. They really wanted to ensure that these basses were not going to come back across the ocean for work anymore. And so the basses tend to sound kind of nasal, and they didn't have any depth. They didn't have a chest voice at all. And so what we do with increasing the neck angle, and we can also increase the overstands for modern playing, can get up into thumb position a lot easier. So a neck reset can accomplish that. Sometimes we'll transplant a neck or make a new neck for these basses that might have a string length that are not friendly to modern playing.
Learn more about what Steve can do to get your bass playing better, and check out his great selection of basses at steveswanstringbass.com. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. With Upton Bass, there is a lot of dialogue back and forth between Upton and the person they're designing the bass for. Here's Gary and Eric on that topic.
By the time I'm taking an order, we may have a dozen emails. We got a couple phone calls back and forth. I mean, it is extremely rare that the phone rings, hey, first-time caller, here's my credit card.
Yeah.
We've got a relationship.
Oh, yeah. Hours and hours and hours.
Right.
So Gary and I have, we've listened to you enough that within your budget, we've gotten you into the right bass the first time.
Listening is what it's all about, and that's what Gary and Eric and everybody at Upton excel in so spectacularly. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast. Approach this album, which is Deep in the Mountains, right? Is that the name of the...
Yeah, Deep in the Mountains.
Yeah, I'll preface it with, I was just chatting with Pablo Aslan, who's the wonderful tango bass player. He's based in New York City, and he just did his first really solo project. It was with String Quintet, and he was talking about it kind of like the ladder approach that you were talking about, where it was almost like making an action movie. It was stuff that you could never do live. It was made for the record, and all these like crazy slowdowns and speed ups that he'd mapped out in Ableton Live that people were playing with, and yeah, it's like super super wild. And then there's the documenting the where you are as a group or as an artist. So what was your thinking with this album? How did you approach this album?
So you see, I think also the way that this album happened was kind of, I was on tour with my trio, and we were playing a festival in Latvia, but we had like 2 days off, and I was like, okay, let's look for a recording studio and try to document what we have, But somehow we ended up playing music that we almost never play, So I don't know. I feel like we caught a day that we were all in this like very easygoing, nice, not needing to show off mood, where we can just like go into the studio and play beautiful music and have fun. It was like one of the least stressed out studio experiences that I had, because we were like, we're not even like going in to make an album. We're just going in to record and see what happens, And then actually, like, the stuff that came out there is stuff that, like, wow, I felt like it was album material. So I was like, wow, cool, let's make an album,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think it was more the documenting music approach. Yeah.
How cool. What a great way to walk in, though, to record and not have like these expectations built up. You just, hey, we got some time off. Let's go in and let's just see what happens. And you were in Latvia when that happened? Wow.
Yeah, we're in Latvia. And, I feel really like it's like if you do things this way, it's almost like sports,
Yeah.
It's almost like a basketball player. Like, you're hoping that you're on a good day. You know what I mean? And like, maybe you are not. It's really possible. But you're hoping to wake up in a good day and that everybody is kind of on a good day and things is going to be there. And yeah, there is nobody to win, but like still, you want to do something that's good. And also, I feel, I spent all of my 20s playing music in a really spontaneous settings, like in jazz clubs and, playing a lot of free and playing a lot of jazz and it's not like I spent my 20s producing very complicated or writing for strings or, sometimes I do here and there, but like mostly what's my main thing as I am now, like it's this like spontaneous kind of playing and interacting with other musicians and finding, like trying to play the moment. So I feel like it would be, making an album this way is kind of the honest place where I'm in right now.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. How much time are you spending on the road these days? Like the last couple of years, are you? I mean, we're Peru and Latvia, and you're Israel and Brooklyn and all the. What's that look like for you in terms of time on the road versus time at home?
So first of all, I moved to live in a place called Mitzpe Ramon, which is in Israel. It's in the middle of the desert. It's a small town, like 5,000 people, And other than people, there is just like wildlife and an incredible crater in the desert. So it's a really beautiful place to live, and I really like it there. And we opened like a small music program there. So people from Israel and some people from Europe are coming to study music and just like practice and, get better in music in a place that's kind of isolated and gives you the chance to do that. So that's the place I call home now, and it's so remote and so far that like, I travel a lot, even though I really like to be home nowadays.
What a nice balance, though, to be able to go 5,000 people. I think the smallest place I've ever lived is 100,000, and I thought that.
Yeah, we have a WhatsApp group for everybody.
Get out of here! Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. It's like, anybody has milk, I'm out of milk.
That's got to be such a nice balance, though, especially when you're the inevitable stresses of being on the road, and then you're in these big cities and going to these venues. I'm on the road a fair amount, and then I come home, but home for me is San Francisco, so it's still like millions of people and hustle and bustle, and that's got to be a really nice way to just sort of get some perspective and some room to breathe.
Yeah, I felt like this was what I was thinking when I moved there. I was like, if I'm going to travel and it seems like this is what I'm going to do, then at least the place I call home could be like a place where I can relax and practice and enjoy nature and just like be more relaxed, And I feel like it's proving itself not bad, because it's really beautiful.
So is that home time for you? Is that like a very creative time for you? Are you doing a lot of writing when you're home, or improving on the bass or practicing? I mean, is that kind of like your happy place for growing artistically?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, especially nowadays, when I'm there, I'm like kind of spending time writing music and spending time. And like now that there is this school, so both my trio members moved in there with me, so that we really have a place that we can like play a lot in trio and just kind of like explore new stuff that we do. And I feel like this is really cool, even though I have to say, I am not sure this like idea that you will go to a quiet place and all of a sudden the inspiration will come to you is like the right thing. I have been in situations where I was like under way more stress, living in a big city, and wrote music like because I had to. There was a deadline, and like I'm not sure I was less inspired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I hear you. I think a lot of my best work has been like kind of when I'm in a manic phase. It's not that a lot of the time I get really lazy in the quiet place. I don't produce, but still, what a nice balance. And how cool this school. So tell me about this school. When did you start it? And like just talk about that.
When I moved from after I started working with Danilo Perez, I had this idea because I saw Danilo and the way he works, and Danilo is one of those guys that plays with Wayne Shorter quartet, but then like it's not enough for him. You could tell it's not enough for him to just like play the best music. He also wants to like do something in the world, So he has the Danilo Perez Foundation, and they have all this educational stuff that they're doing in Panama, and I saw it, and I was like, whoa, this is really like I feel the same way. I want to do some stuff also. So then I moved back to Israel, and I started this project of like making youth meet like young musicians from East Jerusalem and musicians from West Jerusalem, and these guys are meeting and like improvising together and playing, and we're bringing master classes and whatever. And then in the end of the first year, I said like, I kind of want to take all these guys to some beautiful place in the desert and just like have a week where we make music, everybody together. And that's when we moved to do this like 1 week seminar. And this seminar ended up being so much more like on demand than I thought, that so many people came. And after this like 1 week long seminar, people came to me, like 20 something year old kids were like, this week have been amazing. We really want to do this. Would you be willing to open like a music program? So I told them like, if you have 15 people who are up for it, I would do it because, sounds cool. And then they came up with 15 people and we started. And really, it was like 3 years ago. So like, it's kind of beyond control now because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Now there is like 50 students and like we're, So I never thought to manage a school, and I don't know if that's what I want to do. But for now, it's like there is this school, and students are coming, and it's a great way for me to explore, asking myself honestly, like, what are the best things that I learned in my short time as a musician, and what are the things that I feel like people should be introduced to and learn, and what are kind of people they should meet, and what kind of approaches to music they should like meet with and see. And I feel like this is my attempt to give this thing to other people.
It's beautiful. That's great. Man, you got an interesting life. You're living in the desert, you're teaching music, you're touring all over the place, you're drinking pisco in Peru, playing with Danilo, recording albums, on your breaks in Latvia. Did you ever imagine that, or maybe you did, but like if you go back to the Jerusalem Academy years, I mean, did you see a future like this for yourself? Was this what you envisioned? Like, in your younger years? I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Yeah. I kind of wish I did. I think if you ask me like 20-year-old Ehud, like, where would you want to be? He would like not say the life that I have now because he would like not even imagine that it's possible. Mm-hmm. But I felt like everything was happening in such a way that the next step was always like the reasonable next step to do. And now I look at my life and I'm like, wow, I think I'm living life that's really cool. It's really interesting.
Ehud, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, the website is ehudettun.com, and we have that linked up in the show notes. So check out his latest album, Deep in the Mountains, and just everything he's up to. Inspiring guy, really interesting creative path, and I had such a great time getting to chat with him. And thank you for listening. I am so thrilled when I open up my email, and I'm not always thrilled when I open up my email, but when I open it up and I have messages from folks that listen to the show, and I hear from people literally all over the world, it is so interesting to learn about where you are and what you're doing and what you'd like to hear. This is a community show. I say this many times, but maybe I haven't said it recently, so I'll say it again. Everybody that I have on this show is a recommendation from somebody else. Well, 98%, I would say. I have a couple ideas of my own, but this is your show, and I would love to know where you'd like it to go. It might take me time. Sometimes it takes months or years to get to people and book guests and that kind of thing. But I learn so much every time I sit down and do one of these conversations. I turn off the mic and I say to myself, that was the best use of that hour. And I said that over 600 times. It's such a great journey and education for me, and I feel so privileged to have you as a part of it. So thank you. And if you know of somebody that would benefit from learning about Ehud or any of our guests, share this out, share it on social media, forward an email to those that you think might be interested, or get on our email list, and you can do that at contrabassconversations.com, and we send these out as emails. You can just forward that. That would be great. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a bass or bass work, Mitch does great work in Kilgore, Texas, just outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging and archiving everything that's covered on this podcast. Such a huge benefit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.